Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are getting into yet another edition of our early off-season preview here, asking a handful of questions of each of the teams in the league and trying to identify some of their immediate points of concerns, some needs that should be addressed here as we get into the start of free agency and get into really the nitty gritty of the off season. So we are rapidly approaching the end of the list of teams here, but for today, we are talking about our lone Canadian squad. It is the Toronto Raptors that we're going to be taking a look at here. So we will throw some stats up on the screen for you right now. The Raptors end their regular season at exactly 500, 41 and 41. That got them the ninth place spot in the Eastern Conference and fifth in the Atlantic. We did mention it in some of the previous videos. Every member of the Atlantic Division did see some sort of postseason action. So certainly a division that was sort of on top of things in this last campaign. Unfortunately for the Raptors, they were at the bottom end of that strong Atlantic Division, and that was sort of reflected by the fact that their postseason run was significantly shorter than all of their other division rivals. They played really just the one game, 0-1 in the play-in, and were eliminated in said play-in tournament. But that gives us a chance to take a look at some of the other statistics here for the Raptors, because it is relatively encouraging. By offensive rating, they were just outside of the top 10, 11th overall on that front. Their defensive rating was a similar story. They were 12th in the league there. That puts their net rating at 12th overall as well. They played with just the 26th highest pace in the league, so kind of slowing down the tempo a little bit for the most part, and had the 12th highest payroll in the NBA. So, not bad for the Raptors on any front. They were in the top half of the league in offensive and defensive rating, just not quite able to crack that top 10, and subsequently not quite able to push all the way into the playoffs. They came close, but obviously not quite close enough to make it. But with that in mind, we will move along to some of the off-season additions and losses for Toronto. In terms of the additions, a couple of players returning. We've got Gary Trent Jr. and Otto Porter Jr., both of whom accepted their player options and will be returning to the team. So a couple of guys being brought back. Outside of that, though, they did add one more member. They got Grady Dick in the draft. So a little bit of young talent being added potentially to this Raptors lineup as well. In terms of the losses for the Raptors, though, there is one name, and it is a pretty big one for them. Fred VanVleet declined his player option and did enter free agency. Now, as we mentioned, with all the players who decline their player options at this stage in the offseason, there is still a chance that the Raptors do come to terms with him and re-sign him, and he comes back to the lineup. But for now, he will be counted in those losses. So that is the only member of the team as of right now who has actually officially left the Raptors roster as far as I could find. So with that being said, we move into the questions for the Raptors. We will start with the big one here. Question one is Pascal Siakam the guy for the Raptors, and how much will he cost? So Pascal Siakam was clearly the best player on the Raptors roster, and his numbers were pretty solid across the season. He averaged 24.2 points per game, 7.8 rebounds, and 5.8 assists on 48% shooting from the field and 32.3 or 32.4, excuse me, percent from beyond the arc. So he's not exactly a sharpshooter, but he is able to step outside every once in a while and contribute to the team in that manner. Those are great numbers for him, and the best in terms of the scoring output that the Raptors had. The question is, are the Raptors looking to build around him moving forward? Is he the centerpiece? Is he the foundational guy that the Raptors are willing to build around? In terms of his contract, they would almost certainly have to pay him more than he's currently making. This is the final year of his deal, I believe, and he is set to make about $37.8 million. So if they were to give him a new deal or extend him, you're at that amount, maybe even pushing upwards of that $40 million range, unless Siakam feels very generous and wants to give them some sort of hometown discount. But the good news with that play is that they'd be locking him in for multiple years. The bad part is you'd be locking in that price tag for multiple years as well. So it's a little bit risky. And of course, you do have to also take into account if they do decide to do that, to extend Pascal Siakam or re-sign him next offseason, either one, then they are 100% committed not just to him as their number one guy, but presumably to building a competitive roster around him. I don't think the Raptors are interested in shelling out close to $40 million to Pascal Siakam just to dismantle the roster around him. So if you're in on one, you're in on all of them, effectively. You will need to try and build something competitive. So, will they do it? Do they think that this core can move forward and compete? There were some statements from, I don't know if it was the coaching staff or the front office, but some member of the Raptors brass who said something like they didn't really think that they are that far behind some of the powerhouse teams in the East, and that they might be able to catch up to them with a couple of moves. So, is that the opinion of the entirety of the front office? Obviously, we can't tell for sure, but at least some people on that team think that this can work moving forward. But if they are going to move forward like this, that does lead us into question number 2. That question is, what do the Raptors do at point guard? Now, we asked this of several teams, and when we did that, we were sort of asking it from the perspective of they might not have a true point guard, but maybe they don't need one. I'm not sure the Raptors are in that same sort of position. Pascal Siakam may have been the best player on the roster, but Fred VanVleet made himself an integral part of the Raptors as they had previously been constructed. He averaged 19.3 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, and 7.2 assists on not the greatest shooting, but still not bad. 39 from the field, 34 from 3, and 89% from the line. Those shooting splits are pretty solid for a second or third option. But obviously he declined his player option and he's looking for a bigger payday. Outside of VanVleet, the Raptors' only other option at point guard right now is backup Malachi Flynn, who, was good in sort of spot minutes when they needed him. He certainly is not a detriment to the team by any means, but I'm not sure if he's ready for that starting spot. And outside of Flynn, they've got a pair of second-year guys who barely saw any time off the bench. Not really even sure if they would factor into this equation at all. So they're a little thin at point guard outside of the now departed VanVleet. And while it is still technically possible for the Raptors to go out and re-sign him and bring him back, the rumors going around are that he is set to receive some pretty sizable offers from other teams. The kind of offers that the Raptors may balk at trying to match, especially if they're weighing the pros and cons of offering Siakam something in the range of $40 million. Fred VanVleet, I don't know if he gets a $40 million offer, but he is going to get something substantial that the Raptors may not be interested in trying to match at all. So, if the team simply looks to move on from VanVleet entirely, then they could bring in a free agent point guard to take that spot. They could make a trade potentially for someone. But they would need to do so for relatively cheap, with possible extensions for Siakam, for guys like Gary Trent Jr., for OG Anunoby, sort of looming on the horizon. How much are the Raptors going to be willing to dip into their piggy banks for a free agent point guard, right? They may be looking to pick somebody up on the lower end of the spectrum cost-wise so that they could save money for some of those other core pieces. Just to sort of entertain some of the rumors a little bit, there have been several sort of people linking the Raptors to backup options like Miami's Gabe Vincent. And I don't know about Vincent specifically as the guy that they get, but that's kind of the low to mid-level kind of contract that I think they should be looking at, right? If you are planning to build around Siakam, if you're going to give significant roles to Anunoby, Trent Jr., Scotty Barnes even potentially, right? Your point guard does not have to go out and score you a crazy amount of points. He just needs to be someone who you can rely upon to run your offense and deal with the ball handling duties. And someone like Gabe Vincent, who's not going to break the bank, could certainly fill that role. So that is what the Raptors hopefully would be looking for. But that moves us along to point number 3 here. And that question is, how attached are the Raptors to their young players? Now, to this point, we've been talking about them re-signing some of their guys, looking at extensions for some of their important players, and bringing in cheap options to fill the holes. But how attached are they to some of these guys who might be receiving attention as trade pieces? They have a handful of players of note on their roster who are all 25 years old or younger. Gary Trent Jr. is 24, Anunoby's 25, Scotty Barnes is 21, even Precious Achiuwa in there is only 23. None of these guys have emerged as a star player candidate just yet, but they have become relatively reliable, respectable parts of the Raptors core and their sort of second string rotations. So the question is, how much are the Raptors willing to commit to their further development? Do they look to keep all of them? Keep all 4 of those guys on the roster, continue to let them grow and play around a guy like Siakam and see what you get? Or do the Raptors maybe look at cashing in on one or more of them at their current value in pursuit of maybe bigger pieces to build around, to go find a co-star to work with Siakam to potentially take this team to the next level? None of those players that I mentioned have contracts that'll really break the bank, though, if Toronto looks to keep them, right? So you're not going to be losing a crazy amount of money if you don't look to move any of them. But it is worth noting guys like Trent Jr., guys like Anunoby are either at or approaching the point where they become eligible for extensions. So now might be a time to try and move one of them. Of course, there's always the possibility as well that one of these players maybe just sort of drops off and loses a lot of their trade value, and then you feel like you've maybe held on to them for too long. But that's the tightrope act that the Raptors have to sort of put on here. How long do you hold these guys? Do you think that they will take that next step forward and be genuine core pieces of a successful team, or should you try to send them off while their value is high? At least on the Anunoby front, we know that the Raptors seem to have a little bit more faith in him. There are rumors that they've already turned down 1 or 2 offers that were made for him. So OG at least is a guy that the Raptors really do seem to be more attached to than some of the others. But we'll have to see. And that leads us into one final point here, one I'll touch on just real quickly. Question 4 is, do the Raptors just blow the whole thing up? This is a sentiment I've seen in some corners of the Raptors fan base. Not a whole lot, but it is kind of floating around a little bit about whether the team just kind of blows it up and starts over with nearly a full rebuild, right? In this scenario, the team looks to move Siakam, who is in the final year of his contract. They shop around guys like Gary Trent Jr. They ship off the young guys for picks or developing talent. Maybe keep some of the guys on crazy cheap deals and just sort of reset the whole thing. I don't really know about that game plan for them. Some people have also noted for the Raptors in terms of the new head coach that they brought in. It's someone with relatively little experience in an NBA head coaching position. Rajakovic, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% sure, but he's been an assistant. He's been sort of experienced in lower positions, but hasn't been a head coach really before in the NBA. And it is kind of rare for teams looking to be contenders to bring in a new coach who doesn't have sort of a proven track record in the NBA. But obviously there are exceptions to that rule. We have seen, several of them in recent times. So it's kind of sort of a trend, but not one that I would really read too much into. I don't think that coaching decision has any sort of bearing on whether this team blows it up or not. And I think that they just don't, right? I don't think that they blow this whole thing up, trade everyone away, and restart, because that's a 4, 5, 6 year process. And I think that they're willing to give the lineup that they have with the young talent that they have at least, 1 or 2 more shots. So yeah, the Raptors almost certainly are not going to just blow it up and reset the whole damn thing, but I did want to address that just in case. So that is it for the Raptors here. Lots of decisions for them to make. Didn't even really get into, talk about guys like Jakob Poeltl, who is a free agent for them. If they re-sign him, I think that's definitely an indication that they are going to go for it, that they will move ahead and try to build something with this version of the lineup. But let me know what you think. Where do you see this Raptors team going in terms of looking for help, looking for that point guard option? Do you think that building around Siakam is the right move? Which of their young guys, if any, do you think might be the breakout candidate this season, the guy who really takes that step forward in his development and emerges as the leader among those young players? But feel free to share your thoughts. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.